What is this show about? You said you really loved it.
I don't know. It has something to do with history. You're hot.
Hello America. Welcome to another episode of Messed Up Stuff Your Government Did. I'm your host Mr. Powers. I see no other place better to talk about the murder and genocide committed by the American government than the Oval Office. This show is dedicated to you, President Jackson. No other man could have made the destruction of the Cherokee people look so easy. I believe it was you that once said, "Build a fire under them, when it gets hot enough they'll move." Now join us as Messed Up Stuff Your Government Did takes you back to the darkest moment in American history. Hello again. Before we get to the government committed slaughter of the Cherokee, let us look where these great people came from. This map shows the early Overhill Cherokee country. This included the great peace town of Chita, as well as other settlements of the Overhills. Most of these early Overhill Cherokee towns are underwater. But long before the water came, the Cherokee people were being forced out of this area by the government. Their land holdings would slowly be taken from their grips. The size of their great nation was now in the sight of greed and racial unjust. This dark spot on the map shows the area controlled by the Cherokee. In 1817, John Ross would help his people move their main city to North Georgia and begin using a more American style of government. This would be the beginning of New Eshita. Take note. The Cherokee are an island in the evil, unfair sea of the white man. The outside pressure would soon prove too much for them. When we return, the Cherokee Nation will become victims of genocide by the hand of our own government. Greed would be the driving force behind these terrible acts. Hello, welcome back. The time is closing in fast on the Cherokee people. Soon it will be President Jackson who will set their removal in motion. The Indian Removal Act was passed in 1830 by the leader of Cherokee murders, President Jackson. Have a look into eyes of a killer. The thirst for land and gold was behind Jackson's Hitler-like policies. From 1830 to 1838, Chief John Ross would fight for this criminal act against his people to be stopped. It was not enough. It would be some of his own people, led by Major Ridge, that would seal the fate of the Cherokee Nation. On May 17, 1836, Major Ridge, along with a handful of other Cherokee, signed the Treaty of New Eshita. In this secret meeting with government officials, he, along with his sons, had given all rights to Cherokee land to Jackson and his cronies. It was passed with only one vote. In 2 years, Major Ridge's deal would cost the Cherokee Nation many lives, their homeland, and much suffering in a sad long trip west. He too would go west, but his death would soon follow. By a force he was also responsible for, karma. In the spring of 1838, General Winfield Scott showed up in Cherokee country with 7,000 troops. The genocide had begun. Following orders for the president, his men gathered up the Cherokee like animals and many were put into concentration camps before the deadly Trail of Tears was to begin. After a prayer led by Chief John Ross, 16,000 of his people would be forced to leave their native land. On this sad trail of death, 4,000, including his own wife, would die. General Scott stayed to continue hunting down the last Cherokee. Several hundred had escaped to the Smoky Mountains. Unable to find these Cherokee, he called his troops back and the removal had ended. As 12 of his soldiers were withdrawing, they came across an old Cherokee, Sali, and his family. They tried to round them up and begin roughing up his wife. Charlie, speaking in his native language, a different plan. And when he was done, 2 soldiers would be dead. He took his family deeper into the mountains. The legend had begun. During this time, William Holland Thomas, a longtime friend of the Cherokee, would come to their aid. Pressure was being put on the Cherokee and Thomas to find Sali for the murder of the soldiers. He, along with 1,000 others, were still hiding in the Smoky Mountains. It was Thomas who would go to Sally for hopes of a surrender, which he would bring back one demand for General Scott. So it goes, Sally said, if his people that remained in the great mountains of their homeland could remain, he would give himself up. Scott accepted. Thomas escorted Sally from the cave, which today is in the area of the Smokies known as Deep Creek, along with his sons, to turn over to Scott. Within minutes, they were to be executed by a firing squad. It was Charlie, whose bravery and sacrifice gave birth to the Eastern Band of Cherokees, many of which today are direct descendants of these people who hid in the mountains. Thank you for joining us for another evening of messed up stuff your government did. As we leave, let us remember those Cherokee who died at the hand of our government.
Hello America. I would like to take this time to stop ignoring the biggest crime ever committed by our government. I am going to be writing a check for. Yes. I love to write checks, keep printing the money fellows. I just got a new case of fancy pens. Going through those things like hotcakes. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. I would finally like to write a check that fucking means something. Today I am going to return all the land the United States government stole from the Native Americans. Also I'm going to cut a check for $100 billion to cover some of the racism, murder, and unhuman-like treatment they endured, as, surprise, surprise, the crooks in Washington were to blame. Our government's character will never rid itself of that Cherokee blood. And last, I will be stepping down. My daughter is going to take control of government spending. She always beats me at Monopoly. It was then I knew she was more than qualified. And finally, this American icon and Cherokee descendant will give us the story of his people's forced removal after gold was discovered in Georgia, through the eyes of Private John G. Burnett, a soldier that helped with the removal. Now, the man in black, as he brings Private Burnett's story to life.
In the year 1828, a little Indian boy living on Ward Creek had sold a gold nugget to a white trader, and that nugget sealed the doom of the Cherokees. In a short time, the country was overrun with armed brigands claiming to be government agents who paid no attention to the rights of the Indians, who were the legal possessors of the country. Crimes were committed that were a disgrace to civilization. Men were shot in cold blood. Lands were confiscated. Homes were burned, and the inhabitants driven out by these gold-hungry brigands. Chief Junaluska was personally acquainted with President Andrew Jackson. Junaluska had taken 500 of the flower of his Cherokee scouts and helped Jackson to win the Battle of the Horseshoe, leaving 33 of them dead on the field. In that battle, Junaluska had driven his tomahawk through the skull of a Creek warrior, when the Creek had Jackson at his mercy. Chief John Ross sent Junaluska as an envoy to plead with President Jackson for protection for his people, but Jackson's manner was cold and indifferent toward the rugged son of the forest who had saved his life. He met Junaluska, heard his plea, but curtly said, "Sir, your audience is ended. There is nothing I can do for you." Well, the doom of the Cherokee was sealed. Washington, D.C. had decreed that they must be driven west and their lands given to the white man. And in May 1838, an army of 4,000 regulars and 3,000 volunteer soldiers under command of General Winfield Scott marched into the Indian country and wrote the blackest chapter on the pages of American history. Men working in the fields were arrested and driven to the stockades. Women were dragged from their homes by soldiers whose language they could not even understand. Children were often separated from their parents and driven into the stockades with the sky for a blanket and the earth for a pillow. And often the old and infirm were prodded with bayonets to hasten them to the stockades. In one home, death had come during the night. A little sad-faced child had died and was lying on a bearskin couch, and some women were preparing a little body for burial. All were arrested and driven out, leaving the child in the cabin. And I don't know who buried the body. In another home was a frail mother, apparently a widow, and 3 small children, just one baby. When told that she must go, the mother gathered the children at her feet, prayed an humble prayer in her native tongue, patted the old family dog on the head, told the faithful creature goodbye. With a baby strapped on her back and leading a child with each hand, she started on her exile. But the task was too great for this frail mother. A stroke of heart failure relieved her sufferings. She sunk and died with her baby on her back and her other 2 children clinging to her hands. Chief Junaluska, who had saved President Jackson's life at the Battle of Horseshoe, witnessed that scene. The tears gushing down his cheeks and lifting his cap, he turned his face toward the heavens and said, "Oh, my God, if I had known at the Battle of the Horseshoe that what I know now, American history would have been written differently." At this time in 1890, we were too near the removal of the Cherokees for our young people to fully understand the enormity of the crime that was committed against a helpless race. Truth is, the facts are being concealed from the young people of today. School children of today do not know that we're living on lands that were taken from a helpless race at the bayonet point to satisfy the white man's greed for gold. Future generations will read and condemn the act, and I do hope posterity will remember that private soldiers like myself and like the 4 Cherokees who were forced by General Scott to shoot an Indian chief and his children had to execute the orders of their superiors. We had no choice in the matter. 25 years after the removal, it was my privilege to meet a large company of the Cherokees in uniform of the Confederate Army under command of Colonel Thomas. They were encamped at Zollicoffer, and I went to see them. Most of them were just boys at the time of the removal, but they instantly recognized me as a soldier that was good to us. Being able to talk to them in their native language, I had an enjoyable day with them. From them I learned that Chief John Ross was still ruler of the nation in 1863. And I wonder if Chief Ross is still living today in 1890. He was a noble-hearted fellow, and he suffered a lot for his race. At one time, he was arrested and thrown into a dirty jail in an effort to break his spirit, but he remained true to his people and led them in prayer when they started on their exile. And his Christian wife sacrificed her life for a little girl who had pneumonia. The Anglo-Saxon race would build a towering monument to perpetuate her noble act in giving her only blanket for comfort of a sick child. Incidentally, that child recovered, but Mrs. Ross is sleeping in an unmarked grave far from her native Smoky Mountain home. When Scott invaded the Indian country, some of the Cherokees fled to caves and dens in the mountains and were never captured, and there they are today. I have long intended going there and trying to find them, but I've put off going from year to year, and now I guess I'm a little too feeble to ride that far. The fleeting years have come and gone, and old age has overtaken me. I can truthfully say that neither my rifle nor my knife are stained with Cherokee blood. I can truthfully say that I did my best for them when they certainly did need a friend. 25 years after the removal, I still lived in their memory as a soldier who was good to us. I am proud of that. However, murder is murder, whether committed by the villain skulking in the dark or by uniformed men stepping on the strains of martial music. Murder is murder, and somebody must answer. Somebody must explain the streams of blood that flowed in the Indian country in the summer of 1838. Somebody must explain the 4,000 silent graves that marked the trail of the Cherokees to their exile. I wish I could forget it all, but the picture of 645 wagons lumbering over the frozen ground with their cargo of suffering humanity still lingers in my memory today, and it always will. Let the historian of a future day tell the sad story with its sighs, its tears, and be sure that he puts in the dying groans. Then let the great judge of all the earth weigh their actions and reward us according to our work. Children, thus ends my promised birthday story. This is December the 11th, 1890. In the year